How could one drunken outburst at my birthday dinner end with divorce papers waiting on my kitchen counter? How did the man everyone saw as quiet and weak turn out to be the one holding all the proof and all the power? The candles on my 35th birthday cake glowed softly in Romano's bistro as I looked around the table at my husband Roy, our children, our parents, and my sister. The warm amber light flickered across familiar faces, casting dancing shadows on the cream-colored walls. I could smell the rich aroma of garlic and rosemary from the kitchen, mixed with the sweet vanilla scent of the cake before me. Outside the windows, the streets of Portland were alive with evening traffic, people hurrying home from work, completely unaware of how dramatically my carefully constructed world was about to shatter. Roy sat beside me, his hand resting near mine on the white tablecloth, but not quite touching it, a distance that had become typical over the past year. He wore the navy blue suit I'd bought him for our 10th anniversary, the one that brought out his eyes. At 37, he still had the same lean build from his college running days, though his dark hair now showed threads of silver at the temples. He'd been quiet throughout dinner, smiling politely at my mother's stories, asking thoughtful questions of my father about his recent retirement. To anyone watching, he seemed like the same Roy I'd married 12 years ago, steady, reliable, perhaps a bit reserved. But I knew him better than that. Or at least, I thought I did. We'd met at 23, both fresh graduates working entry-level positions in downtown Seattle. I'd been a junior marketing coordinator at a tech startup. He'd been a financial analyst at a consulting firm. Our first date had been coffee at a tiny cafe near Pike Place Market, where we'd talked for 4 hours about everything and nothing. He'd been different then, more open, quicker to laugh, eager to share his dreams of starting his own financial planning practice someday. Those early years had been good. We'd married at 25 in a small ceremony on the Oregon coast, honeymooned in Vancouver, and settled into a modest apartment in Portland when Roy accepted a position at Henderson and Associates. I'd found work at a marketing agency, and for a while, everything felt like it was unfolding exactly as it should. We were building something together, a partnership, a future, a life. Emma arrived when I was 27, and Lucas 3 years later. Roy had been an attentive father from the start, taking paternity leave both times, splitting night feedings and diaper changes without complaint. He'd read parenting books cover to cover, researched the best car seats and pediatricians, approached fatherhood with the same methodical care he brought to everything else. But somewhere along the way, I couldn't pinpoint exactly when, things had shifted. Roy's career had taken off. He'd become a senior partner at Henderson and Associates, which meant longer hours, more responsibility, frequent travel to meet with clients in Seattle, San Francisco, even New York. The money was good, excellent even. We'd moved from our apartment to a 4-bedroom house in the suburbs with a yard for the kids. I'd been able to cut back to part-time work, focusing more on Emma and Lucas. On the surface, we had everything. The house, the careers, the healthy children, the retirement accounts growing steadily. But beneath that surface, something had been eroding. Roy came home exhausted, his mind still at the office. Our conversations became transactional, schedules to coordinate, bills to discuss, decisions about the kids' activities. The long talks we used to have, the jokes only we understood, the easy intimacy, all of it had faded into a comfortable but distant routine. I'd felt it happening and told myself it was normal. This was what marriage became after kids and careers and mortgages. Everyone said the passion faded, that you had to work to maintain connection. But I hadn't worked at it, and neither, it seemed, had Roy. Or maybe he had been working at it in ways I hadn't noticed. Maybe those moments when he'd suggested a weekend away, just the two of us, maybe those had been attempts I'd brushed aside, claiming the kids needed me or work was too busy. Maybe when he'd asked how I was really doing, not just the surface answer but the deeper truth, maybe I'd deflected, said I was fine, changed the subject. Looking back now, with the cruel clarity of hindsight, I could see all the moments I'd dismissed as his emotional distance when perhaps it had been mine all along. And then 6 months ago, I'd met James at a marketing conference in Seattle. James Crawford, 39, divorced, working as a creative director at a boutique advertising agency. He'd approached me during a networking break, complimented a presentation I'd given on digital strategy for small businesses. He had that easy charisma some people possess, quick smile, attentive eye contact, the ability to make you feel like the most interesting person in the room. We'd exchanged business cards, connected on LinkedIn. Innocent enough. But then came the email a week later, mentioning he'd be in Portland for a client meeting, asking if I'd like to grab coffee, and continue our conversation about collaborative marketing approaches. I should have said no. Or at the very least, I should have mentioned it to Roy. Instead, I'd met him at that coffee shop on Morrison Street, telling myself it was networking, professional development. We'd talked for 2 hours, and not once did the conversation touch on work. He'd asked about my life, my dreams, what I'd wanted to be before I became a wife and mother. He'd listened in a way I couldn't remember anyone listening in years, fully present, asking follow-up questions, making me feel seen. That first coffee had led to others, then lunches, then the afternoon at the hotel on 5th Street that I'd justified to myself a dozen different ways. James made me feel young again, desired, interesting, all the things I'd forgotten I needed to feel. It felt like the perfect night at Romano's, until James spoke. I should have seen it coming. The way he'd been drinking steadily since we arrived, the edge in his voice when he made jokes, the possessive way he kept looking at me across the table. I'd invited him in a moment of recklessness, wanting to prove to myself that I could maintain control, that I could keep these worlds separate. Roy had raised his eyebrows when I'd mentioned inviting an old college friend, but he hadn't objected. He never objected to much anymore. Already drunk, James hinted loudly that I'd gotten my birthday wish earlier that day. His words sliced through the room like a blade through silk, drawing everyone's attention to me. The conversation that had been flowing around the table, my mother discussing her garden, my father asking Roy about work at Henderson and Associates, stopped abruptly. All eyes turned toward me, confusion and growing concern reflected in their expressions. I tried to brush it off with a nervous laugh, saying something about James always being dramatic, always joking around. But he wouldn't stop. The alcohol had loosened something in him, resentment, perhaps, or frustration at being kept secret for so long. With cruel honesty that felt almost gleeful, he accused me of secretly seeing him. Coffee dates at that little place on Morrison Street, lies about dentist appointments that never actually happened, even meetings at a hotel on 5th Street where I'd told Roy I was shopping with my sister. I watched Roy's face as James spoke, saw the careful blankness settle over his features. In that moment, I realized something terrifying. He wasn't surprised. Shocked by the public revelation, yes, but not surprised by the content. My husband, the man I'd thought was oblivious to my absences and excuses, had known something was wrong. Had perhaps known for longer than I could bear to consider. The candles on my birthday cake continued to flicker, but the celebration was already over. Everything I thought I'd been protecting, my family, my image, my carefully balanced double life, was crumbling in real time. And Roy, quiet, steady Roy, sat perfectly still beside me, saying nothing at all. The table fell into a silence so complete I could hear the soft jazz music playing from the restaurant speakers, a melody that suddenly seemed mocking in its cheerfulness. My family stared at me with expressions ranging from shock to dawning comprehension. My children, 10-year-old Emma and 7-year-old Lucas, sensed something was wrong even if they couldn't fully understand what. Emma's hand reached for her father's arm, a gesture of comfort that made my heart constrict painfully. Roy said nothing at all, which somehow hurt more than anger would have. His face had gone completely blank, that expression I'd seen maybe twice in our 12 years of marriage. Once when his father died, once when he lost his biggest client at work. It was the look of someone processing information so devastating that emotion had to be temporarily shut down just to survive it. When James finally claimed we'd been meeting for months, embellishing details that made everything sound sordid and intentional, Roy quietly stood up and walked away. Not dramatically, not with a scene. He simply placed his napkin on the table, stood with that careful control he always had, and walked toward the exit. My father started to rise, but my mother put a hand on his arm, shaking her head. I sat frozen, unable to move or speak, watching my husband's retreating back as he pushed through the restaurant door and disappeared into the Portland evening. Around me, the birthday celebration had transformed into something else entirely, a crime scene, perhaps, or a funeral. My sister's face was tight with barely controlled fury. My mother looked away, unable to meet my eyes. The children were crying now, softly, confused and frightened by the sudden change in the atmosphere. The drive home was unbearable in ways I couldn't have imagined. Roy had waited in the car, silent and still, while I gathered the children and made hurried, shame-faced excuses to my family. The 20-minute journey from the restaurant to our home in the suburbs felt like hours. Roy barely spoke, focusing only on the road ahead, his hands steady on the wheel of our Toyota. In the back seat, Emma and Lucas were quiet, too scared to ask questions. Once home, Roy moved with mechanical efficiency, getting the kids ready for bed. I heard him reading to Lucas, his voice calm and soothing as though nothing had happened, as though our family hadn't just imploded in a public restaurant. That composure frightened me more than yelling would have. It suggested a level of control, of pre-planning, that I hadn't given him credit for. Later, after the children were finally asleep, my sister arrived. She'd let herself in with her spare key, her face a storm of emotions, anger, disappointment, betrayal on Roy's behalf. She confronted me in the kitchen, demanding the truth with an intensity that left no room for evasion. Her voice was low but fierce, conscious of the sleeping children upstairs but needing answers. I tried to downplay it at first, saying James was just an old friend from college, someone I'd reconnected with innocently. But the lies unraveled quickly under her relentless questioning. How do you explain coffee dates you hid from your husband? How do you justify deleting text messages and clearing your call history? How do you make secret hotel meetings sound innocent? Eventually, piece by piece, I admitted the truth. We'd met 6 months ago at a conference in Seattle. He'd been charming and attentive in ways I'd forgotten men could be. I'd felt lonely and unseen in my marriage, I explained, as though that justified anything. Roy had been so focused on his career lately, so distant and preoccupied. James had made me feel desired, seen, important. The classic justifications of someone who'd made terrible choices and was now scrambling to make them understandable. My sister listened with increasing disgust. When I finished, she asked one simple question. Did you ever think about what this would do to your children? I had no answer that didn't sound pathetically self-centered. Of course I'd thought about them, but clearly not enough to stop. Not enough to be honest. Not enough to either fix my marriage or end it with dignity before seeking attention elsewhere. Roy appeared in the doorway then, a duffel bag in his hand. He'd been upstairs packing while I confessed to my sister, gathering clothes and essentials with the same methodical care he brought to everything. He looked at me with eyes that held no anger, no passion, just a deep, exhausted sadness that cut far deeper than rage would have. He didn't yell. He didn't call me names or make accusations. He simply said I'd crossed the line the moment I started lying. Not when I met James for coffee, not when I felt attracted to another man, but when I chose deception over honesty, when I decided to protect my secret instead of my marriage. His voice was quiet but firm, each word carefully chosen and devastating in its accuracy. That night, Roy packed his bag and left to stay with his brother Marcus across town, saying he needed space to think. He kissed Emma and Lucas goodbye in their sleep, standing in each of their doorways for a long moment before heading down the stairs. I watched from the hallway as he loaded his bag into his car, the streetlights casting long shadows across our driveway. My sister left shortly after, her parting words still echoing in my head. You didn't just betray Roy. You betrayed all of us. Everything we thought about you, about your marriage, it was all a performance. The door closed behind her with a soft click that felt thunderously final. Alone in the quiet house, surrounded by the remnants of my birthday celebration, wilted flowers on the table, a half-eaten cake on the counter, presents I hadn't opened, I received a message from James. It was unapologetic and possessive, suggesting we could finally be together now that everything was out in the open. As though my marriage ending was somehow a victory, an obstacle removed rather than a family destroyed. For the first time, I saw him clearly, really clearly, without the flattering filter of attention and desire. I saw a man who had no problem pursuing a married woman, who'd gotten drunk and revealed our affair at my birthday dinner in front of my children, who viewed my husband and family as inconveniences rather than human beings deserving of respect. I realized with sickening clarity how badly I'd misjudged everything, not just James, but myself, my marriage, my priorities. As I stood there in my kitchen, surrounded by the remains of my birthday celebration, it hit me with the force of a physical blow. One moment of weakness, one secret that grew too large, might have destroyed my marriage, my family, and the life I thought I was protecting. But that wasn't quite true, was it? It hadn't been one moment. It had been dozens, hundreds of small choices, each one taking me further from the person I'd promised to be when I married Roy. The next few days passed in a blur of difficult conversations. Roy called to arrange times to see the children, his voice professional and distant as though he were scheduling a business meeting. My mother came by, her disappointment more painful than any lecture. Friends who'd heard about the dinner started reaching out, some supportive, others clearly taking sides. I tried to reach Roy several times, wanting to explain, to apologize, to somehow make him understand. But his responses were brief and formal. He was consulting with a lawyer, he said. He needed time. He'd let me know about next steps. The man I'd been married to for 12 years, who'd held my hand through 2 difficult pregnancies, who'd built a life with me, that man seemed to have disappeared, replaced by someone careful and guarded. Then came the afternoon that changed everything again. I was sorting through mail when I noticed an envelope with a law firm's return address, Blackwell and Sons, not the Henderson and Associates where Roy worked. Inside were divorce papers, professionally prepared and thorough. But it was the accompanying documents that made my blood run cold. Roy hadn't just left that night at the restaurant. He'd been preparing for this moment, quietly and methodically, for weeks. Maybe longer. There were bank statements showing he'd opened a separate account. Documents showing he'd consulted with an attorney 3 weeks before my birthday. Receipts for a private investigator dated back to early September, 2 months before James's drunken revelation. He'd known, or at least suspected. And instead of confronting me, instead of yelling or making accusations, he'd gathered evidence. Photographs of James and me at the coffee shop on Morrison Street. Hotel receipts I thought I'd hidden. Phone records showing deleted calls. Even testimony from a waitress at the 5th Street Hotel who recognized us. The man everyone saw as quiet and weak, including me, had been anything but. While I'd been sneaking around, congratulating myself on how clever I was, Roy had been building an airtight case. While I'd been lost in the excitement of secret meetings, he'd been preparing for exactly this outcome. While I'd underestimated him, dismissed his silence as passive weakness, he'd been showing the kind of strength I'd never recognized. I sat on the kitchen floor, papers spread around me, and finally understood the full scope of my miscalculation. Roy hadn't been blind or naive. He'd been strategic. He'd given me chances to come clean, opportunities I'd missed because I was too caught up in my own narrative. That trip he'd suggested we take together last month, that had been a test, hadn't it? The marriage counselor he'd gently brought up, another opportunity I'd brushed aside. I didn't cry until I reached the edge of town. I'd gotten in my car with no destination in mind, just needing to drive, to move, to be anywhere but that house full of evidence of my failures. I found myself on the highway heading toward the coast, watching the Portland suburbs give way to farmland and forest. Not loud, dramatic sobs, just quiet tears sliding down my face as the reality finally settled in. The marriage I'd slowly neglected, the trust I'd chipped away at lie by lie, was officially over. Not because Roy was cruel or unforgiving, but because he was finally done being blind. Or rather, done pretending to be blind while he gathered what he needed to protect himself and our children. The divorce papers weren't just about ending a marriage. They detailed custody arrangements that clearly favored Roy, citing my pattern of deception and prioritization of personal desires over family welfare. There were character witnesses lined up, people from our community, from our children's school, even my own sister who, it seemed, Roy had spoken with weeks ago. He'd thought of everything. The house, purchased before our marriage with money from his inheritance, would remain his. The car I was driving was in his name. Even our joint savings account had been legally separated, with documentation showing which deposits came from his salary versus mine. I'd been so focused on the excitement of my secret romance that I'd never noticed how thoroughly my husband was preparing for my betrayal to come to light. I stayed at my mother's house that night, lying awake in a childhood bedroom that suddenly felt too small for the weight of my choices. The room hadn't changed much. Same floral wallpaper I'd picked out at 14, same bookshelf full of young adult novels and high school yearbooks. But I had changed, hadn't I? Or perhaps I'd simply revealed who I'd always been underneath the performance of being a good wife, a good mother, a good person. My phone buzzed once after midnight. James. I didn't open the message. I didn't need to. Whatever he wanted to say no longer mattered. He hadn't ruined my life, I had. He'd been a willing participant, certainly, but I'd made every choice that led here. I'd initiated our first coffee date. I'd suggested we meet at the hotel. I'd crafted the lies to my husband, my family, myself. The next morning, the silence felt different. Clearer. Final. I could see the path forward now, even if I didn't want to walk it. Elias, Roy, I had to remember to think of him as Roy now, not as my husband, not as the person he'd been to me, would move forward with purpose, with plans and proof and boundaries. He had his evidence, his legal team, his support system. He had the moral high ground and the sympathy of everyone who mattered. I would move forward with consequences. There would be custody battles where his documentation would paint me as an unstable influence. There would be conversations with Emma and Lucas where I'd have to explain, age appropriately, why mommy and daddy weren't living together anymore. There would be looks from neighbors, whispers at school events, the slow social death that comes from being the one who broke the family. For the first time, there was no one left to lie to. No husband to reassure with false promises of transparency. No lover to appease with excitement and attention. Just myself, and the uncomfortable truth that love, real love, doesn't survive secrecy. It needs sunlight and honesty, and the courage to face problems directly rather than seeking escape in another person's arms. Over the following weeks, I began to see patterns I'd ignored for years. The way I'd always sought validation outside myself, needing constant reassurance that I was attractive, interesting, valued. The way I'd blamed Roy for my unhappiness rather than taking responsibility for my own emotional state. The way I'd convinced myself that my needs justified my deception, that somehow being unhappy in my marriage gave me permission to betray it rather than either fixing it or ending it honestly. Roy had been distant lately, yes, but had I ever asked why? Had I inquired about the pressure he was under at Henderson and Associates, or the way his mother's declining health was affecting him? Had I noticed that his silence wasn't weakness or disinterest, but the quietness of someone carrying heavy burdens he didn't want to burden others with? James had been attentive and exciting, yes, but what had he actually offered beyond flattery and the thrill of secrecy? When I really examined our conversations, they'd been shallow, focused on the moment, never extending to real futures or complex realities. He'd wanted the married woman, the secret meetings, the affair, not the actual person I was, with children and responsibilities and complications. The truth I'd been avoiding was simple and devastating. I hadn't been neglected in my marriage. I'd checked out emotionally long before I met James, withdrawing into resentment and self-pity rather than doing the hard work of honest communication. Roy's distance had been a response to my withdrawal, not the cause of it. I'd been rewriting history to justify my choices, painting myself as the victim when I'd been the architect of our marriage's slow dissolution. I didn't lose my marriage in one night at Romano's Bistro. I didn't lose it when James drunkenly revealed our affair, or even when I first met him for coffee in Seattle. I lost it in 1,000 small moments. Every time I chose resentment over conversation, every time I deleted a text message, every time I crafted a lie instead of confronting the truth of my unhappiness. I lost it the moment I chose attention over honesty. The moment I decided that my feelings mattered more than my commitments. The moment I convinced myself that I deserved secret happiness rather than difficult honesty. And now, sitting in my childhood bedroom at my mother's house, watching the early morning light filter through curtains I'd chosen 20 years ago, all I could do was learn how to live with that truth. There would be no redemption arc, no moment where Roy realized he still loved me and took me back. The divorce would proceed. The custody arrangement would be finalized. Life would reorganize itself around this new reality. My children would grow up in 2 homes instead of 1. They would learn earlier than I'd wanted that people fail, that parents make mistakes, that love doesn't always survive. Emma already looked at me differently, with a wariness that broke my heart. Lucas was too young to fully understand, but he would eventually, and that future conversation haunted me. James sent a few more messages over the following days, then stopped when I didn't respond. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd moved back to Seattle, his dramatic exit from Portland as careless as his entrance had been. He would move on quickly, I suspected, find another married woman seeking validation, play the same role in someone else's destruction. But I couldn't move on, not quickly. I had to sit with what I'd done, really sit with it, without excuses or justifications. I had to look at my choices clearly and decide who I wanted to be going forward. Not for Roy, not to win him back, but for myself and for my children who still needed a parent they could trust. The work ahead was immense and uncomfortable. Therapy to understand why I'd made these choices. Honest conversations with Emma and Lucas that wouldn't blame their father or minimize my responsibility. Rebuilding relationships with family members who felt betrayed. Learning to be alone without immediately seeking external validation. Figuring out how to be a co-parent with someone I'd deeply hurt. As I sat there in the morning light, I realized something else. Roy's careful preparation, his quiet strength, his refusal to engage in drama, all the things I'd mistaken for weakness, had actually been profound respect for our children. He could have confronted me explosively, made scenes, forced conversations in front of Emma and Lucas. Instead, he'd protected them as long as possible, gathering what he needed to ensure their stability when the inevitable collapse came. Even in ending our marriage, he'd been a better partner than I'd been in trying to maintain it. That knowledge would stay with me, a permanent reminder of the person I'd failed to be and the person I needed to become. The story doesn't end with reconciliation or dramatic forgiveness. It ends with acceptance. The acceptance that some damage can't be undone, some trust can't be rebuilt, some choices create permanent consequences. It ends with me learning to live as the person who broke her family, who chose excitement over commitment, who learned too late the value of what she'd had. It ends with the truth that sometimes we lose everything not in one catastrophic moment, but in 100 small betrayals we convinced ourselves didn't matter. And now, there was nothing left to do but begin again, carrying that truth with me. Thank you for watching the video to the end. YouTube may no longer suggest my channel to you, so subscribe to it to receive new interesting stories. You will also help the channel grow and improve the quality of its content. A playlist with other interesting stories that you can listen to is now displayed on the screen. You can also write in the comments what stories you would like to see on the channel.